Really?
No.
Have at least five. You
You
know, Mitchell's gonna be about.
She is.
Everybody was okay.
I wasn't around them very, so I didn't, but I wouldn't be.
Was.
Yes. Yes.
I didn't see daylight.
Well, but I know there's always gonna be an opponent. That's the thing about governing is this.
Board meeting will now come to order. In the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag,
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Alcorn,
Here.
Ms. Bailey. Present. Mr. Banks,
Here.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Here.
Ms. Bomke,
Here,
Ms. Crystal, Ms. Franklin. Here. Mr. Kelly. Ms. Lamb. Here. Ms. Lawson. Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Skinner.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Stewart.
Here.
And Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
And there's Ms. Crystal.
In accordance with the VRE Operations Board electronic participation policy, Mr. Skinner has requested approval to participate as a voting member remotely. Believe, however, that we do need a motion and a second to approve Mr. Skinner's remote participation.
second.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey and Ms. Bomke. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions. Over to Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just this is an update for today's session. Just want to make some assignments here real quick in the event that we do need responders or assistance in this room. So Alex in the back will be our primary 911 caller. John off to the side will be backup. Chris Henry and myself will be primary AED CPR. Just by a show of hands, everybody in here is certified, qualified. Okay, so we do have some extra help. That's great. I do want to point out for today's meeting, as you may notice, as you came into the space, there is some work being done in this primary path, if you will, through that double door to the restrooms and stuff. What we're going to ask is that, and the work just began out there. So we're going to ask if you need to use the restrooms and stuff, if you could use this side door, and then of course take the first left and use the restrooms and stuff there. But I will caution you as well, as any good carpet replacement job, you got to move stuff out of the way to make room for that. So there are some obstacles, if you will. So just as a safety tip, as you're walking, don't watch your shoes, look up, and then that way you can see those obstacles as you're coming around the corner. So that is my safety briefing for today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So move, Madam Chair.
Second. Mr. Alcorn, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That was an aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? The motion passes. Next up is our minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes from our October meeting? None. Is there a motion? Second. Bonke and Ms. Crystal, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the October VRE Operations Board meeting, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Again, to the November meeting and happy Friday. As a reminder, we are streaming this meeting. Obviously, Mr. Skinner is participating remotely, so please remember to speak up. There are mics throughout the room. Please keep side conversations to minimum. And just a few committee reminders. The nominating committee met this morning with Mr. Alcorn and Ms. Bonke, and we'll have a slate of 2022 board officer nominees ready for the December meeting. And then the finance committee will meet following today's board meeting, chaired by Ms. Bonke. But of course, any member is welcome to participate in that meeting. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, we continue to be successful, I will say, in reaching out to our jurisdictional partners in providing some on-site training. Of course, a lot of that type of training died off during COVID for obvious reasons. So this past month, we did host some training with Prince William County emergency dispatchers. And these are dispatchers that do work in our service territory. They cover like the city of Manassas, Manassas Park, and even Quantico. So I had a good in-depth training session with them. And again, this is all about railroad familiarization with our equipment, and just going over safety protocols. Hoping we never have to use them, but it doesn't hurt to be. So that was good. Ridership for the month still continues to increase at a very slow pace. Painfully slow, but nonetheless, I think we've moved up to about 2 riders at a time instead of 1 rider at a time. But it's still trending in a positive direction. Subsequently, average daily ridership just a little bit shy of 3,000. On-time performance continues to tick back up. It's 86% system-wide, and of course, there's the Fredericksburg line, Manassas line breakdown. I did want to say, again, we're still below our 90% target. And so I just wanted to share a couple of data points with you. You've seen these graphs before. Keep in mind, on October 18th, we instituted a new schedule change. So that would have been almost, a little bit more than halfway through October. And then subsequently, so it's been in place for about a month now. When we look at congestion, so if you look at, I'll just draw your attention to the top category, congestion there, and particularly for the first 9 days of November. I think, just granted, it's not a full month, but you can see that we are seeing definitely an improvement from a congestion standpoint overall. I will point out, though, we do have a couple of opportunities, and it's not schedule related as much as well, number one of the first opportunities is we're looking to revise our operating plan as it relates to a train consist movement. One particular train that departs out of Union Station in the afternoon. It's a Manassas line train 327. And the issue there is when that train comes from our LaFont storage track into the terminal, we're still seeing a lot of delays from Amtrak trains that are actually occupying the platform. So we're having a hard time getting that train into the terminal so it can turn and come back south. So we've been working on a revised operating plan with Amtrak, Keolis, our staff, and CSX. So long story short, it's not a schedule issue. It's more of an operating issue, and we hope to have that resolved, a modified operating plan in place, hopefully within days, maybe a week at the latest. So that'll definitely improve that one train. And then we do have a couple of opportunities on the Manassas line with a couple of our reverse flow trains. And it's actually, those trains are not obviously, don't have high ridership, but we're having some conflicts out there and we're working to resolve that. Part of that is also, working through some dispatcher issues. So overall, I think that the change is made, but we do have a couple of, like I said, opportunities out there. Moving forward, Project Spotlight. So I picked this month, and actually you'll see some more next month. As you know, we talk a lot about expansion, we talk a lot about, other opportunities for VRE, but at the end of the day, one of our key priorities is taking care of the stuff that we already have, right? So just review a couple of major projects that we have going on with our rolling stock equipment this month. Next month, I'm going to bring you back a couple examples of what we're doing on the facility side, and then give you a brief review of our annual review of our transit asset management plan. So just quickly, the pictures on the left, that's a project we currently have going on. Those are the HVAC systems for our passenger rail cars. That's a project that the board awarded back in 2019. It's about a $2.5 million contract. So we have about 144 units, and there's 2 units per car that are being overhauled. And then, of course, our forces are actually our partner Keolis. They remove the HVAC unit. It gets sent off. It comes back, and then Keolis reinstalls it. So at this point, we have 43 out of the 71 cars affected completely to date. And then the center.
Was this a plan prior to COVID or are we because of COVID?
Prior to COVID.
Okay.
So if you recall, this is part of our life cycle maintenance program that was established. That was a strategy that was established by the operations board back in the 2013, 2014 as part of our overall maintenance management plan. So,
And how confident are we that the new units are effective with COVID?
there, as far as being effective with COVID.
Well, as far as the filtration, like, I don't know the science behind how
Yeah, the
how
standard-
confident you can
Yeah,
be about.
the standard filtration system on board the passenger rail car really hasn't changed. The biggest upgrade to these units is that these units originally came out with, and I don't want to get too technical here, but they came out with R22 refrigerant, right? And so there's been an upgrade from an environmental standpoint to a cleaner Freon system. So those are all getting updated there. From a filtration system standpoint, we use, and this is on board the car, we use the most restricted filtering system that we can. But keep in mind, and not unlike other transit services, but we do change the fresh air inside that car often. And part of that is because we're making station stops and our doors are opening. So we are establishing a good replenishment of fresh air, which is back to the COVID question, that's key there.
Thank you.
So the center picture, one of my personal favorites, is we're doing a turbocharger changeout on the prime movers of the locomotives. This is a critical component that provides increased intake air pressure to get to the 3,600 horsepower that we need for the prime mover, and that's the device in the middle. It's hung up there by that red stand. That's on the locomotive side, and then on the right side, actually, we're just about completed with that. We have 19 of the 12 locomotives done. The truck assemblies that under the rail cars, that is again a project that where we are essentially taking the truck assemblies out, and of course those have the brake systems on it that has the wheels and that type of stuff. It's really that's where you get the ride quality or the primary ride quality on the cars. So we're doing those about a car a month, maybe a little bit more at times. And currently we are at, let's see, we've done 30 out of the 71 cars that are affected. So again, just wanted to go through that real quick with you. Yeah, yes,
Can I
sir.
just ask, so, name another system, but, you know, occasionally there seem to be very unexpected, defects or issues associated with especially the rolling stock. Is that anything, I mean, I know that, well, it looks like we're not as niche a player in terms of the types of, but are we at risk in any way, any significant risk of being surprised by any of, particularly the newer that we bought from? Basically, are we looking, we inspecting adequately at this point? Is there anything we need to do to look for the unexpected?
We have a 7,000 series.
Oh, sure.
It's excited to put a fighter point on.
Right.
Let me just start this way. We're very fortunate or very unique, maybe is a good word. With the type of service that we operate, we're able to get our hands on all of our equipment on a daily basis, and in some cases, multiple times a day. There are federal standards, there are industry practices, there's all of those elements. I will say in just about all cases, we probably double up on what those minimum standards are. And because of the type of service that we're in, and partly because we can. And it's not that much in terms of an incremental cost. So our standards are very, very tight. For example, if the Federal Railroad Administration establishes let's just say that they establish a standard for flat spots on wheels. And flat spots on wheels, there's a standard for nothing more than 2.5 inches. And there's some other rules. We've actually pulled that back and said, you know, we're not going to release anything that's above 1 3/4 or 2 inches. But honestly, our passengers are going to tell us, not that they're out there measuring them, but our passengers will tell us if we have a flat spot, and I'm looking around the room and I think people are smiling under their masks. But they'll tell us if we have a flat spot of about 1 inch, right? So, because that gets into a little bit of a ride quality issue. So that's an example of where we've tightened a lot of those things up. And what's good about the equipment that we have, there's a lot of diagnostic equipment on here as well. We can remote monitor our locomotives. We have an alert system that actually will send us alerts, not just when things fail, but when things are about to fail. So we have a lot of that, but I will say, you know, we're continuing to chase technology. I mean, as technology enhances, we continue to go out there and try to grab not just the technology, but the best practices as well. That's a long way of answering your question, but I wanted to, it was an opportunity to give you a little bit more insight and background. And of course, programs like this are critical. Being able to do these types of maintenance intervals, and again, through our lifecycle maintenance program, you know, we have things broken down to the lowest replaceable unit. So that's what you're seeing here. We don't go and overhaul that HVAC unit. We let experts go do that. We will remove it, replace it. Same with the turbocharger. We will remove it and we will replace it. So, and then you'll find out, we have an item later about air brake equipment. Same idea there as well. Let the experts that do this every day, let them do that level of maintenance. Okay. I can talk about this all day if you want. Okay, I did want to give you an update efforts under our program of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just where we've been the last year. So we took about I'd say just breaking out the last 12 months. That first 6 months, we were doing a lot of things internally, having a lot of conversations, having a lot of just trying to get a sense of what some objectives and goals and stuff would be. And so once we were at that point, we went ahead and brought in a consultant, and he's actually helping us. He's actually stood up some sessions with small groups of staff and essentially just really just kind of advising what our current state is. He's looking at our different programs, all the way from organizational charts to how we onboard personnel and stuff like that. So that's where we've been in the last 6 months. And the results of that effort will be, as pointed out up in here, we're waiting for a baseline assessment report with some recommendations for moving forward. And I just wanted to, point out our Chief Administrative Officer back in the corner there, Cindy Bullock. She came on board in July, and she obviously coming from VDOT, she stood up similar programs at VDOT. So she was able to come in, take a look at what we were doing, and has basically taken that ball and run with it. So I look forward to coming back at some point, maybe not December, that date, plus or minus a few days, but coming back to you soon, maybe as soon as January, and sharing some of those results, and more importantly, what the opportunities for improvement are. So just wanted to give you a quick highlight of where we're at on that topic. And then completely shifting gears. Let's talk real quick about the Federal Infrastructure Act and how that affects VRE. More information to follow, but I just, if you caught my weekly update last week, kind of sent you the very high level look at this, but just wanted to be a little bit more granular, a little bit more specific in that essentially through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there's two primary areas that VRE participates in. So it would be through the formula programs and of course discretionary spending. On the formula program side, and down about the second from the bottom bullet there, or even the third from the bottom bullet, that shows we receive currently about $10 million a year through the 5307 program and about $21 million a year for the 5337 program. And I will point out, because I can talk about maintenance all day, that 5337 program is what goes back and funds those state of good repair projects that I showed you on the previous slide. So that's what gives us the ability to make that happen. But we're anticipating what it looks like right now is that there's about a 30% increase in those programs. So again, not hard, embedded in stone, but we could be looking at additional $3 million for the 5307 program and an additional $6 million from the 5337 program. That's just a quick snapshot participating on that side. On the discretionary funding program side, of course, there are projected increases in a lot of these programs that we're familiar with. And but at the end of the day, as the devil's in the details. When we actually see these NOFOs come out and see how these programs have been enhanced or structured, we'll know more then. But not stealing any of Mark's thunder later on, but it's these programs here that, and maybe in addition to some 5307 funds and 5337 funds, where we'll be looking at our updated capital improvement program, looking what those unfunded balances are, and over time trying to match up, and fill those holes, in addition to, other state and local money.
And thank you for the quick analysis on this. One of the dynamics that seems to be emerging with some of our other operators is, we're very excited about this, but it seems like it's really going to exacerbate what's always been a little bit of the problem with the federal funding streams, which is that the feds love investing in capital and are very uninterested in supporting the running of the railroad. And I just wondered if you all had a chance to just think about this. I mean, I know with some of the other operators, we're almost looking at a system where we're going to have surplus capital money available and huge operating deficits. Knowing that we're obviously trying to be mindful of ridership recovery. Have you all given any thoughts about that potential for a balance, and whether there are things that maybe are living in our operating budget that we could make a case should be capital, if we have to be, if we're on the hook to deliver, or to actually use capital money? Are we concerned about being able to do that? Any thoughts on that dynamic?
I'll just say that, yes, we are looking for those kind of opportunities. One of the, well, frankly, having now some clear direction, if you will, on where this infrastructure package is heading 5 years from now. Honestly, in the last year and a half, not so much. So this gives us an opportunity for a fresh look here as well. But we have, over time, again, I get to go back and talk about maintenance. Over time, we have been able to pull some things out of what we were traditionally charging to operating funds and turning those into LCM projects because they fit the criteria. Okay? We're really scrubbing down to the, at least on the maintenance side, really the nitty gritty on that, but I'm never going to say never. There could still be some opportunity there for us as well. And then, of course, always looking for other funding streams. We're not ashamed to, to have a proverbial handout to our partners at the Commonwealth or any state kind of funding or even regional funding as well. So, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I think VRE will probably be better positioned than most, at least when our ridership returns, because we've always had such a high rate of fare box recovery.
Exactly.
I'm so glad the team is already working on trying to find those opportunities.
Yeah,
which is
that's just one of those things that we continue to keep on our radar. So.
Yes, there's a copy of this somewhere and looking through stuff, I didn't see it.
A lot of this is what like I said, I think I sent most of this in the week update last week. We'll make sure you guys get this. You'll get this version of it. I can't think offhand. I know Leslie sent you some things last night. I'm not sure if this one was in there. Anyway, we'll get that.
Up and I didn't see it, so that's why I was asking.
Okay. Well,
yeah, I'd like to get a copy of it.
We'll condense it down into a PDF. Maybe just post it up on our website. You guys can go grab it.
So there's a link, whatever. Definitely want to get it.
The other thing, and again, I want to, obviously putting this out there, we'll be having more discussions and stuff about this, but I would be remiss, and of course, Mr. Joe Schwartz back there would have words with me if I did not at least note the footnote about the appropriations. Okay? And that's obviously we're running under a continuing resolution right now that expires on December 3rd. If continuing resolutions continue past December 3rd, then of course we're still held back to, at least traditionally, to previous levels of funding and stuff like that. So hopefully if we get a FY 2022 appropriations bill, then all of this essentially, becomes real. So just wanted to point that out, that it's one of the next milestones in this whole process. Any questions?
I just want to make sure that I made the connection. The train that you mentioned over into Manassas ties into the gentleman's comment that was in public comment, correct?
As it turns out, yes, ma'am. That is
Okay.
correct. That is the train.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? That's actually a perfect segue into our next agenda item, which is public comments. Public comments continue to be taken electronically. The period for written public comments opened last Friday and closed at 8 a.m. this morning. Submitted comments have been forwarded to all of the members and will be attached to the minutes of today's meeting. So ask the clerk to read.
Yes, we received a comment from Miracle Holthauser of Manassas Park, who writes, ever since the schedule change of 18 October, the trains are always late. Not just a few minutes either. And then we stop for other traffic more than we did before the change. The southbound train continues to show up closer to the pre-October scheduled time than the current one. This means that we leave our jobs just to wait almost an hour to get on a late train. Example, today, November 17th, train 327 scheduled to arrive at 3:28 did not arrive until 3:44. Monday, November 15th, the train did not arrive until 3:50, and then we had to stop and wait for more traffic on the way home. No one understands the need for schedule change, and it doesn't seem to be working well for the trains either. Almost every day, the train is delayed due to congestion at Union Station or late arriving parts. And this was less of an issue before the change. It's the comments.
Thank you. I know the operations board understands how frustrating it is to wait for late trains and to wait for traffic. I think Mr. Dalton spoke to the fact that that is an operational challenge and a solution is being worked out and hopefully days or weeks. So with that, while we do encourage members of the public to view these proceedings on our live stream, we also, the meeting is still open to the public. So I want to see if we have any other members of the public with us who wish to comment. To our action items, our first is 9A, a resolution to authorize the VRE to participate in a joint RFP for auditing services. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're seeking authorization to participate in a joint request for proposals for auditing services for a period of 3 years with the option to extend for up to 4 additional years in 2-year increments. This solicitation will actually be championed or led by NVTC, and PRTC and VRE will, of course, be part of that process, part of that selection process. And then in the end, we're likely to all have, or will have, all three of us will have our own separate contracts with that audit firm. But this is how the current contract is. This is how we've done it in the past, and it does obviously provide some continuity between VRE and the commissions in terms of the auditor, and there is some information out there that would suggest that GFOA and stuff supports our strategy moving forward. So that's my summary, Madam.
There a motion and a second to approve resolution 9A.
Move approval.
It's been moved by Mr. Elkhorn, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Any other questions or?
Brief comment, Madam Chair. I really appreciated the discussion in the board report about the question of rotating one's auditor. I know that had come up in the past, and so just having sort of some external field expertise shared with us about
Crystal, agree. Hearing no other comments, all those in favor of resolution 9A, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes. Our next item is 9B, a resolution to authorize the CEO to execute a contract for the repair and overhaul of air brake equipment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, we get to talk about maintenance. We're seeking authorization to execute a contract for the, or with Wabtec Global Services Corporation of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for the repair and overhaul of air brake equipment for the amount that's stated in the resolution plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $1,422,968. This contract will be for a base year with 4 one-year options. Just a quick note that in addition to just normal repair and overhaul work, there's a segment of this work that's actually mandated by the Federal Railroad Administration. So just for your information, every 4 years, we are required to overhaul the entire air brake system on both the rail cars and the locomotives. So this is the service that we'll use. And again, it's Keolis Rail Services taking the components off. We send it to the experts. They overhaul, repair, and certify. That's the key. Certify those components. It comes back to us, and then we go ahead and make that or conduct that overhaul work on either the passenger rail cars or the.
Motion and a second to approve.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Bonke, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Need to remember to wait longer. Any abstentions? The motion passes. Our next item is 9C, a resolution to recommend the commissions approve the 2022 VRE legislative agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to, we're seeking authorization to, to get a recommendation from the Ops Board, send it to the commissions as part of our annual process. I will ask Joe if you want to just step up and potentially from our previous discussion on this topic, maybe just highlight any of the, any potential changes or anything. And of course, we'll answer any questions that you have. So thank you, Joe Schwartz.
Sure. No, this is essentially the same language that you saw last month. I made a couple of changes based on the conversation we had to the meetings held through electronic communication means. I have continued to have the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority Board issue be consistent with the language that it looks like both the commissions are going to have, which is that the board members should be picked from a list provided by the two commissions. Everything else is pretty much the same.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I can't tell if our chair of the legislative committee wishes to say anything, but happy to open the floor to questions or comments.
Her eyes are saying something.
Be careful. Take my mask down.
Does anyone have anything else to add? Is there a motion and a second to approve?
Madam Chair, I move this item forward.
Moved by Ms. Franklin, seconded by Ms. Lamb. Any other questions or comments?
Sure. Thank you for this. I know the legislative committee has been working hard in changing dynamics, at least at the state context, so I really appreciate it. I am wondering, just knowing that the virtual participation continues to be a priority for this group since we are so affected, especially when it comes to subcommittees, by having to gather in person. And I know that that sort of compromise continues to work its way through the legislative process. Not the most expert person on it in the room, but I was looking kind of afresh as we prepare to finalize it at our recommendation on the reforms for open meetings, which I believe currently reads that we should coordinate with VRE's parent commissions and other stakeholders. And I wonder if we might want to amend that to say something like support in coordination with, because I do think we're supportive of that flexibility, and to the extent it's helpful for folks to know that it's not just that we want to be at the table, we'd actually like to affirmatively move that forward. And also, it sounds like there might be some back and forth about hybrid meetings and whether there might be more flexibility for electronic but not hybrid. To me, it seems worth stating that we'd like as much flexibility as possible on both. So I think what I might be proposing is just an amendment from the floor, and indulge me, I'm sorry, I know that's always sort of annoying, but to see if we might just change the language to read support in coordination with, rather than coordinate with, and then say make policies on the conduct of electronic and or hybrid meetings. So I don't know if that roughly sounds okay, if that's acceptable to the maker of the motion. It's friendly.
Acceptable to me, thank you.
Thank you. So we could maybe just then incorporate it procedurally into the main motion. I don't know, Mr. Schwartz, if I'm barking up the wrong tree, you'll let me know, right?
No, that sounds good.
Well, I appreciate that, and so that's been agreed to. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of resolution 9C, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Our next item is 9D, a resolution to recommend the commission's authorize VRE staff advance a public bond issuance backed by the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund, or CRAC. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the next step, essentially, in the process for the CRAC backed debt issuance. As you recall, that we've had a couple of presentations and stuff on this. So I think at this point, why not just go ahead and turn it over to Mark Schofield. I will also say Joanne Carter from Financial Analysis is in the house as well. And so Mr. Mark.
Thank you, Rich.
Just, do you have a clicker?
I do have a clicker. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, board members. In addition to having Joanne here, and you'll hear from her in just a couple of minutes, we also, of course, have our general counsel, Steve McIsaac here. So when we get to the end, if we have any specific legal questions about what's being proposed here, Steve will also be happy to jump in with Joanne and answer questions as well. One goal we have in particular today is to address a few of the questions that had come up during the information presentations that we made to the board members and the commissions about the risks of heading down a path like this with the bond. So we will make sure to cover the topic. So here's the bottom line. In order to meet the commitments that we have under the funding agreement with VPRA, our recommendation is that a public bond issuance backed by the CROC is best aligned with VRE's goals while also meeting the needs of the VPRA. Based on the market conditions as of earlier this month, which of course may change, a public issuance would generate approximately $131 million of proceeds that would then go towards the Commonwealth's purchase of the right-of-way from CSX. We are asking that the Operations Board recommend to the commissions that VRE proceed into the implementation stage of a public bond issuance. I should say very clearly here that simply maximizing those total proceeds was not our charge. We really are charged more with the balancing act, how to meet the expectations of VPRA while also exercising our own prudent fiscal management and not tying the hands of those who will come behind us down the road to run VRE. As we did discuss during the information presentation, other feasible option that has been under consideration is the USDOT's TIFIA program. If we were to go that route, if it were successful, that would produce more total proceeds. As you can see in the chart here, about $104 million at current market conditions. But a public sale offers, we believe, three significant advantages over the TIFIA. The first is flexibility and control, both now and in the future if we do want to borrow again. Just to put it candidly, our team will design the covenants, the coverages, and the reserves. All of the documents will be drafted by our lawyers, our bond counsel. We will test them with the credit ratings agencies, getting indicative ratings, and then we ultimately will decide how to proceed. The VRE and the commissions will be in the driver's seat. If we were to go the TIFIA route, a lot of that control would be handed over to the DOT, to their team. The second item is the timeline. Public sale offers a much quicker timeline, gets that money into VPRA's hands more quickly, which they have indicated to us is important. That also reduces the interest rate risk that we face. Excuse me. As this process stretches out longer, we run the risk of increasing interest rates and lower total proceeds. And then the third benefit is lower requirements at the beginning of the issuance. In particular, certain costs of the issuance, getting those reserves in place. If we were to go the TIFIA route, we could not use the bond proceeds. We would actually have to use our own CROC proceeds, or revenues rather. That would extend the period then at the end of the 10-year period when we would get the control back on CROC. So that offers another distinct advantage. We get that money back more quickly. So those are really the benefits that we see of going this route. So now I want to take a step back. I want to hand it over to Joanne, really to talk about a few of the key assumptions that have gone into this process, to talk about the credit assessment, and in particular, to talk about some of the recent comparable credits in Virginia, to give you all some comfort that the route that we're going down is a route that's really well traveled. Sorry.
Morning. It's fantastic to be with you all. It has been quite a while. And especially when we're gonna do some things and fund some things, it's exciting. So good morning. So thank you very much, Mark. So what you see here on this slide, as Mark just said, is a summary of the basic security that we're assuming for the CROC bonds. This was developed in consultation with your internal counsel as well as with VRE's bond counsel. In large measure, it mirrors the legislative parameters that were set forth by the General Assembly when the CROC fund was created and when VRE was given the authorization to borrow against these monies. What you'll find is that the structure is similar in many respects to the other types of special tax bonds that have already been implemented and issued in Virginia using a regional funding approach. Most recently, the bonds that used that type of funding approach were sold in August of this year by VDOT, issuing through the Commonwealth Transportation Board for their I-81 corridor. Those are also regional fuels tax-backed debt. And the table that you see here summarized key features that we are assuming for the CROC bonds, which will ultimately be the primary drivers of the credit quality of this debt, which I'll speak to in a minute. One of the most important factors in structuring this debt is the debt service coverage, basically the ratio of revenues to debt service on an annual basis. We've assumed 2 times, which is very strong, as well as the reserves, which Mark mentioned. That's another very important feature that both the rating agencies and potential investors will look to when they evaluate this debt. And then certainly last but not least, as you all know, VRE as well as the commissions adopt revised financial and debt management policies earlier this year, and this plan of finance is in conformance with your policy directives. So the first thing that we did when we began our analysis earlier this summer was completed a complete credit assessment. So using the structure that I just described, we analyzed the credit factors of the CROC bonds using the criteria that the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, would apply to this debt when they analyze it. And what that allowed us to do was to come up with our expectation of what we thought the credit rating would be on the CROC bonds. It's important to note that the rating agencies have slightly different approaches when they look at bonds such as these. They generally refer to them as special tax bonds. But the diagram that you see here captures many of the common factors that the agencies will assess when they assign ratings to the CROC bonds. Our expectation is that the CROC bonds would be rated in the AA category. So depending upon, that's a category that can be from AA- to AA+. And then one of the things that I know is a question amongst the members is the matter of risk and risk assessment. So our credit assessment, as well as the assessment that the rating agencies will undertake, will consider the key risks associated with this debt. So those risks are baked into our assessment that these bonds can achieve ratings in the AA category. And then finally, should VRE and the commissions concur with this financing approach, a very early step in the process will be to approach the rating agencies, describe what we're intending to do, and get indicative ratings from them to confirm that the path that we intend to go down will result in the outcomes that we hope for. As part of our credit analysis, in addition to looking at what the credit agencies use as their criteria, we also looked at comparable credits around the Commonwealth, which you see summarized in the table here. We are being somewhat cautious in our estimate of what the ratings might be for the CROC bonds. So when you compare the top couple of rows there of the CROC estimation of rating versus the other debt that has similar characteristics, you'll see that they all are in the AA category. There are 3 other issuers who have paved the way, if you will, for the bonding approach that we're recommending. NVTA went first in 2014. And then HR TAC, which is the sister organization in Hampton Roads. And then, as I mentioned most recently, VDOT sold their special tax bonds in August of this year for the I-81 corridor. So what this means for VRE and the commissions is that the rating agencies and investors will be very familiar with the structure that we put forward. It's something they've seen before and it's something they've analyzed before. There is now in Virginia over $2 billion worth of debt that is outstanding, that is backed by the regional tax structure that has become a mainstay of financing transportation here in the Commonwealth. That includes fuel tax backed debt as well as other types of taxes. I will also add that all three of these entities and myself personally have been through some version of legislative change in their journeys to bonding. So there is a well-worn playbook on how to manage those twists and turns should they materialize, and we will call upon it if needed. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark to conclude. Yes.
We have a copy of these slides. Is there something that? Then I don't think I have any of the materials. If I'm missing something, somebody please share.
The answer is yes.
The material that you sent out yesterday, because I
Thanks. So give us an idea of what's in that playbook in the event that you have twists and turns on the legislative side.
did I get an answer to my question? Is there a copy? I have not recalled seeing that. Have I gotten that or has it been sent out?
I did send out the presentation that I was provided for this.
Could we maybe get somebody in the building to?
I think it was yesterday.
Yes.
So maybe we can resend that. And then Ms. Lawson, sorry.
That's okay. I would like a copy too, Mr. Stork, if that. But what's in your playbook that you know helps get through these twists and turns that you refer to? Because gas tax, well, we can't control. This body can't control the fuel market, but we're tied to it.
Sure.
And we certainly can't predict what any legislative body in the future is going to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. We were going to actually jump into this right here in this next slide. So I'll say, the questions that Supervisor Lawson is asking are the same questions that we've heard a number of times during this process, both in terms of sort of what I would call the economic risks of usage of gasoline changing in the future, and then also the political risks that the tax structure may change. I think I would say first, as Joanne mentioned, bonds backed by regional taxes in Virginia are well known to the ratings agencies and to the investors. And so a CROC-backed issuance relying on our taxes is not going to present anything particularly novel, with respect to risk. I think on the economic risk, as we have here in the table, you could be talking about something like a recession, that just reduces the economy overall, drives down usage. Or you could be talking specifically about sort of changing consumer behavior, increased usage of EVs and things like that. Either way, on that side of things, I think agencies and investors would both take note of the 2 times debt service coverage and the position of this CROC within the sort of overall regional fuels tax collections, and the fact that it has top priority. So taken together, those 2 things in terms of the structure do provide significant mitigation against those kinds of economic risks. Now, as far as the political risks, those are harder to judge. You could be talking about non-appropriation. You could be talking about changes to the tax rate. You could be talking about a diversion of monies out of the CROC. All I would say there is one, maybe Joanne can come back and give us a couple of the war stories with respect to the NBTA and things like that. One is that it does happen, and so you have to watch what's happening in terms of the legislation. Two is that I think if it did look like there were state level action that might be taken to impair regional fuels taxes, we would not be alone in wanting to make the case against that. But then at the end of the day, ultimately, investors know that this is a risk, bonds like this in Virginia. And ultimately, and this is an issue that we've raised a number of times, the debt is going to be non-recourse to the VRE, to the commissions, to the local jurisdictions, and to the Commonwealth. We, as I hope that we've made clear, this is not the last bite at the apple that all of you will have. If you give us the authorization now to go ahead with the implementation, we will be coming back late winter, or spring with the actual bond documents for your review and approval. And at that time, we will also be providing a legal opinion stating that the CROC debt issuance, or sorry, that the bondholders of any CROC debt issuance will not have any recourse against the localities. So that has always been a part of our plan from the very beginning. It is incorporated into the funding agreement that we have with the VPRA. It is memorialized in the changes that we made to the debt management principles, and it is going to be explicitly clear in the bond documents when we come back to you all the last time. I don't know, Joanne, do you want to talk about the MBTA experience that you had, or that?
I could interrupt just a little bit while she's coming up. Yeah, I think the political risk is a good discussion. Frankly, support moving ahead with this, but I think part of the reality is that we all could have a role if it looks like there's going to be a problem. If there's a move to kind of the tax or to cut it back, then let's all go into this with our eyes open, and I think we could all work together to avoid something that would jeopardize the risk of this bond issue. So it's not completely external. I know some of it could be, but I think this is one where, with all the jurisdictions we represent and others that actually would be affected, that we do something about. I hope it would.
I know we have some other questions, but I guess I want to let Joanne speak to the NVTA example to respond to this.
I'm happy to. I was thinking about Supervisor Noe driving down here because I was trying to recall all the twists and turns of the and Mr. Zimmerman, in fact, because they were warriors in that battle at NVTA. So what happened in NVTA, as many of you may know, is the bonds were issued in 2014, and there were funding reallocations made to the NVTA streams. There were originally 3 streams of revenues that were pledged to the NVTA bonds. 2 were taken away and redirected. And that happened after the bonds were issued. The stream that remained was the sales tax funding, and that is a very strong tax. NVTA issued very little debt. Their initial issuance was only 69 million. And I think initially the coverage on those bonds was over 5 times. So to the point of coverage here in the context of CROC, that was a very effective tool in mitigating the risk that some of the revenues got simply taken away. So that's sort of the first kind of armor, if you will. The second way that we were able to get comfortable in the NVTA context is that all of those risks that were just described were very explicitly disclosed. And so when we send you the bond documents, you'll have pages and pages of wonderful reading to enjoy about all the risks associated with these types of credits. And ultimately, the reality of our constitutional structure in Virginia and the way public finance works in Virginia, the General Assembly has the final say on these revenue streams, what the tax levels are and where they're applied. The other example I would give is one where here in Virginia, we've successfully navigated legislative changes is actually with the I-81 bonds. It's the most recent one. When that structure was first set up, the catchment area, the regional area of application of those taxes was one thing, and then it changed. And so communication with the rating agencies, careful disclosure to investors are absolutely essential in being able to manage these sorts of things because they do happen. They're simply a reality. Investors know that this is a risk. We're very careful to disclose it. And, Mr. McIsaac and I have been down this path one too many times. We've applied the lessons we've learned. I think I will say that. And if we need to apply them again or come up with some new ones, we absolutely will.
I know Ms. Bomke had a question.
Let's go back to the slide before. Ratings.
That's me.
Okay, and looking at these different debt issuances up here, obviously the I-81 was July of this year. TA was last year. One got a AA- and one got a AA+. Debt service coverages were the same. What were the primary reasons in the difference in those ratings?
Sure. And the as of date you see there, that's the as of date of the most recently surveilled rating. So the initial NVTA ratings were assigned in 2014 at AA1, AA+. So two things. So those ratings were assigned, the NVTA ratings were assigned in 2014. The I-81 ratings were assigned this summer. The big difference you see there is in the S&P rating between the AA+ and the AA-. During the course of the pandemic, Standard & Poor's took the most harsh view, if you will, of the credit impact of the pandemic on fuels tax related debt and special tax related debt. NVTA, as I said, is primarily a sales tax backed obligation, whereas the I-81 bonds are simply the fuels tax collected within the I-81 corridor, the jurisdictions who touch the corridor. So the catchment area, very different. The types of taxes, very different. And S&P has taken a decidedly more bearish tone, if you will, on special tax bonds as a result of the pandemic.
That was very helpful. And then my last question would be, looking at debt service coverage being 2 times, would there be any ability with the new legislation coming down from DC, if the board, the VRE board chose to, would we have any flexibility to take any money there and use that as an additional reserve in addition to the 2 times debt service? And would that help our bond rating at all, given the unknowns of the fuel tax?
Sure. I think we have built into the structure one very specific reserve that will be funded from the bond proceeds for bondholders. So that's our first line of defense. It'll be equal to your debt service. We have one reserve already baked in. Also have what I will call a liquidity reserve. It's not pledged to bondholders, but the intent is through the policies that this body already adopted to have some working capital, if you will, from CROC, which the rating agencies and investors will view with comfort. To the extent that we want to add more reserves, we certainly can look at that. The question will be whether or not investors find that to, I don't know that the agencies with their criteria will give us much more benefit, because the reserves we already have are kind of maxing out their criteria, if you will. And for it may come down to just a comfort level with this body and the commissions, that having some extra set aside, perhaps not pledged even, because that would give you the maximum flexibility, could be something we absolutely could look at. More liquidity is usually better.
So I think, my takeaway from this whole conversation is a reassuring one, which is to say, when it comes to backing that is subject to political machinations, the market has ways of taking that into it. And I think that's really the important headline. I will say back at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and one of the 2 parent commissions, there was some concern and maybe like a little catastrophizing, right? We have an incoming administration that has had very little on transit, save an interest in repealing a recent increase in the gas tax. But we had the question of, well, what would happen? I think effectively the question was, if this administration were to somehow lead an effort to repeal that revenue source entirely. And it would help me a little bit, I think, to be able to answer that question, if we could say more about what would it mean for the Commonwealth to do something like that. My sense is that would be such an extreme action that would imperil the Commonwealth's future creditworthiness and longer term fiscal outlook, that it seems vanishingly unlikely that a responsible governor of either party would do that. But Could you help give any context? I mean, what would the implications be? If there were a total repeal of the revenue source that backed a bond that has been sold as RV.
I've been in this business for 30 years and have never seen it.
Okay.
I hope to be in it at least another 10 and never see it again, and never see it at all. I think, so here's I think Mark made this point, this sort of comfort in numbers point that was made about the 2 billion of debt that's already out there backed by this structure. The other debt that's out there that's important for us all to remember is that the Commonwealth Transportation Board has, I think it's like $3 or $4 billion worth of debt backed by the Commonwealth Transportation Fund and the Transportation Trust Fund. Now, the funding that supports all that debt was recently rewired, Chapter 1250, I think it was. It was done responsibly. None of those bonds experienced any trouble in the marketplace. And VDOT and CTB continues to take advantage of those borrowing programs. So I don't predict interest rates and I don't predict political situations. They're bad for my business. But I would say that there's been a really long tradition in Virginia of taking care with the Commonwealth's reputation in the capital markets. And I would expect that to continue.
Yeah, I mean, really just expressing how stark that would be and what a break with not only Virginia's longstanding tradition, but it sounds like, I mean, without precedent really in other states or regions as well. So I think that's helpful and will help me to, I hope, reassure my fellow commissioners.
Thanks. If I recall correctly, I believe Governor-elect Youngkin campaigned on wanting to repeal the most recent increase in fuels tax, right?
I think that was the restructuring that you're talking about.
Well, I was referring to the omnibus transportation that we had 2 years ago.
Which included increase in fuel tax.
Right.
So that's going to be a little bit of a difficult policy to unwind, but that is his.
We say it again.
I think that's going to be a slightly difficult policy to
Before that,
unwind.
the 2020.
So the 2020, the omnibus bill
Right.
included a restructuring, but also the increase. So my understanding when Youngkin said he wanted to repeal the recent increase,
Right.
that's what he was talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
But not repeal the entire,
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
revenue stream.
Exactly.
So, and we don't have, first of all, we don't know if that's gonna ever come to fruition, because it has to go through the GA. With some tight margins. And what would be the fiscal impact in the event that is successful?
It's a lot of continuing disclosure to investors, frankly. I mean, my hope would be that there would be responsible financial decision-making to, if we're taking away one thing, to substitute something else, which we have seen happen in the course of history here in Virginia.
Yeah, but in 2014, they certainly didn't do with the MBTA.
Fair enough. It's taken a while to get some of the pieces back, and I know it's not all there yet. I think that's why when we are entering the bond market, we have such conservative structures. We have 2 times coverage. That literally means the revenues can be cut in half. We can still make our debt service payments on them. We have reserves. So there are only so many, structurally, I think we put in place all the things we can to mitigate the risks. But at the end of the day, the risk you were talking about is one that investors agree to bear. And so that's where, that risk ultimately lands.
I was on it, well, I'm still on MBTA. And I remember when we had the legislative change signed by the governor, took $154 million from our organization. And it affected us in terms of our projects. I mean, I commute every day on a road that's supposed to be 4 lanes, it's gonna be 3 lanes because of it. And it's the most congested highway in Northern Virginia. So you mentioned that you presentation, you have two risk assessments. One of them was from the credit rating agency. But you didn't consider the political risk and then have like even a political risk assessment that Ms. Lawson mentioned. And my concern is that not only was there not a risk assessment taken on our own, but also there's don't seem to be like a game plan in case of anything changes legislatively that affects us. It's $225 million of debt that we're about to undertake. And we're leaving it for the market. And I experienced this in MBTA and it affects our projects. We have to consider it internally and how it's going to affect us and not just our coverage for C-Rock. So I think we should have at least a game plan in case any change takes place because we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen, just in case.
Well, Madam Chair.
Ms. Lawson and then Ms. Ball.
Well, thank you, Mr. Banks, because that, I want to add the icing to that cake. Because of Highway 28 and the failure that it's been, Prince William County is now going to fund $300 million of that project. So to your point, there was no political risk assessment, and now Prince William County is going to spend a lot of money to build this road.
Ms. Bonke and then Ms. Crystal.
So sitting here thinking and contemplating this whole discussion, and I used to be in this business, working with financial advisors like Joanne Carter. You know, the investors are big boys and big girls. These bonds are going to be sold to institutional investors that are used to taking on this risk. However, there haven't been major defaults in the bond industry as it relates to something like this because the rating agency would sit down with the investors and with the public entities and say, okay, we got to figure out a way out of this. Okay, we got to work with you. This is much bigger because it's dealing with state revenues. I'm just wondering if there's any way that we would maybe have access to more information from the Youngkin campaign in another month, should we be deferring this so we might be able to gather more information.
Similar note?
I think that's a great point, and I would just say, I would go back to the point I raised before, that this is not the last bite at the apple. And so if you were to give us the authorization to continue to proceed down this road now, we're not anticipating coming back to you with the debt documents until February, March, something like that. So I think we would have a chance to see how things are evolving at the political level. And if it seems like they are heading in the wrong direction, we would absolutely pause. We would sit down with Jennifer or whoever, DPRA, DRPT. Yeah, I know. Whoever. But we have an agreement with VPRA, and if it looks like the political situation is changing in such a way that trying to throwing caution to the wind just to meet that agreement is not the right thing to do, absolutely, we would take a step back and have those discussions.
Crystal, then Ms. Franklin, then Ms. Bailey.
I just wanted to suggest that I think we maybe are conflating two kinds of risk, and there's one that we should probably let our, PFM financial managers kind of off the hook for, and the other we should really try to name more crisply so we can get better feedback from our own staff on. So there's the financial risk, which is to say the risk really of default, right? Which is like the nuclear option. I think we've heard enough to know. I think we can feel some confidence that the risk of default, even with these political changes, is very low. But the risk that I think you guys are talking about so compellingly, Mr. Banks and Ms. Lawson, and I too have been living through this with NVTA since the reallocation of the funds in 2018, is the kind of programmatic risk that these political machinations are going to mean we have less money to program as a region, as VRE, to our priorities. And even in that event, again, the risk of default on a sold bond is I really hope I'm not wrong here, is vanishingly small. But it does mean we could have less money to go around. For our capital program at VRE, God knows for the region, I was just at MBT last night, we are very concerned about reductions to the regional revenue sources that fund these critical projects. And that will mean making hard choices exactly like the ones in 2018. So maybe then the question is not really one for our financial advisors to say, what is the risk of default, but for our VRE team to say, what is the risk that somehow VRE has fewer state revenues coming to us to spend on operating capital or whatever else as a result of political decisions? And if that risk comes to pass, are we going to regret having tied up a lot of CROC in debt service for this fund? So I don't know if that makes sense to others, but to me, that question is very open and very influenced by what the Young administration has very little visibility into right now and tends to do. So I suggest all that to say, like, I think that's a worthwhile conversation to have. And to me, the one that is kind of a bigger question than the one for our financial advisors of, is this an irresponsible debt to issue because we're going to default on it? I think the answer to that is no. Question of, are we going to wish we still had those money in the program if other sources get constrained is a very live question. And one that actually, I suspect, Mr. Schofield, you and your team could help us answer.
Franklin, then Ms. Baer.
Sure, yeah, I'll just say very quickly, obviously, we just passed our legislative agenda, so one thing that I would encourage us to do is make for the fuels tax maybe a priority. And that's not something I think we need to legislate on, but just keeping that at top of mind when we're meeting with the Appropriations Committee and meeting with the Transportation Committee and other relevant committees in light of kind of this discussion. And I would imagine some of the other regional commissions would probably same if these discussions are happening at MBTA and some of the other commissions. So just something to kind of think about as we move forward and start making those connections with the relevant playmakers that's going to help determine which direction transportation revenue will go in. So just something for us to maybe think about.
Thank you. I'm not to prolong the conversation, but I agree with what Ms. Crystal said in terms of us being much proactive. I can support us being proactive and then just understand what those risks will be because we don't know what the political game plan is right now. We just don't know. But I'd rather be proactive moving forward. Just want to add that. Heard what Ms. Crystal said.
Yeah, just a question for Mark. If we were to pursue the other option that you highlighted, TIPIA, the financing source would be the same, right? But the same risks would exist with TIPIA or this, right? So,
Absolutely.
So this is our tool on the transformation of VRE that we all want to see. So I certainly don't want to be prudent, and I've seen this presentation 4 or 5 times now between here and VRE, and Mark does a great job every time, and there's some degree of risk here. I think what I would say is if we're uncomfortable accepting the possibility that the fuels tax could change this administration or some future administration, or the possibility that funding streams could shift, we wouldn't finance any significant infrastructure projects in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, I don't know that the risk here is much greater than it was 2 ago. I don't think things have changed as dramatically as maybe it feels. I don't think Governor Youngkin would be as irresponsible to put at risk not just this and these bonds, but the $3 to $4 billion of bonds that were mentioned for CTV and other things that are by the staff. So I think we should continue to move forward on the timeline.
Too, because I know there's a lot of conversation about the gas tax. I thought it might be helpful to clarify. The CROC is funded by a regional gas tax. That was a part of legislation to put together dedicated funding, obviously for VRE as well as WMATA. And that was actually in 2018. There is I think a natural growth in it, but the restructuring of the big trust fund is the state level, very important money. But the regional gas tax is not tied to that bigger statewide restructuring. Some could hope in that it's also not a part of a target of the statewide, but I just thought it'd be helpful that this is actually, there's two different pieces of legislation. And this is one that is older. It's also linked to dedicated funding for Metro. And it does not have a natural increase like the statewide gas tax.
That is.
Right.
That's-
It's hard, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I just thought that would be helpful to clarify, and hopefully I got that right. I know.
Mr. Strickland, question?
Generally support moving forward at this point because we have a to proceed if that's the case. And I think the final decision that we make on this, I think it's prudent to look at it this way. I think caution is real. But really making a final decision, and we need to do something to try to.
Ms. Matthijs, thank you very much. That is key. We have a hard time keeping everything straight in our heads, but you just put the fine point on it, so I appreciate that. So I will move this forward cautiously and appreciate the comments that Mark made that, we will monitor and we'll know more a month from now, and we'll definitely know more a few months from now as far as what our General Assembly and new governor's administration is going to do. So I'll move it forward with that caveat.
Really, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of resolution 9D, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions. Motion passes. 9E, a resolution to support Prince William County's application for NVTA funding consideration for this one. Project, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you recall, we brought this item last month and had some discussion. This is a project, again, the Route 123 interchange project. This is just a Prince William County staff seeking a letter of support. Again, we brought this back last month, and then we were asked to come back this month and discuss items or discuss how this project specifically benefits VRE. So with that, Christine Hefner, our manager of project development, I know most of you have met her before, continues to work with Prince William County staff here, and thought that we've just got a couple of slides here, and Christine will get to the point about how this benefits VRE. So with that.
Thank you and good morning. As part of this effort, VRE staff has looked at a conceptual plan developed by Prince William County and VDOT for the proposed interchange and done some assessment of the results of implementation of that plan on VRE Woodbridge Station and specifically access to the station. Here we go. This diagram shows the existing access conditions at the station. The station is kind of in the middle left of the graphic where the VRE logo is. The yellow are the two platforms. This is a station that has platforms on the outer edges of the railroad right-of-way with two tracks in between. There's also a pedestrian bridge that connects the two platforms. Primary vehicle and pedestrian bicycle access currently to the station are at the south end of the station at the Dawson's Beach and Express Drive area from Route 1. On this map is the existing vehicular access, and then the blue is the pedestrian access. So there are connections across Route 1 to the North Woodbridge Town Center area as proposed in the Prince William County North Woodbridge Small Area Plan with some at-grade pedestrian crossings of Route 1 and then connections through Route 1 across the pedestrian bridge, across the platforms to the south side of or the east side of the railroad right of way and the VRE station, as well as along Dawson Beach and Express Drive. So that those are the focus of the current access to the station. Bus access is also via the Dawson's Beach Road and at the east side of the station. This shows in the darker gray the configuration of the proposed interchange and pedestrian and vehicular paths. And the proposed interchange and the related pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure does provide new vehicular access across Route 1 and from the North Woodbridge Town Center area to the VRE station from the north end, from the Route 123 and Belmont Bay Drive. There's also pedestrian bicycle access that's included in this new interchange that provides expanded access to the VRE station to the north. And that new access is shown in the dashed green and the dashed blue lines on this graphic. It does provide interconnections to the existing pedestrian and bicycle network, and specifically provides opportunities for bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicular access across Route 1 via Route 123 and Annapolis Way to the areas where new development is currently underway and additional development proposed as part of the Northwood Town Center area. There is the potential for additional access from the station, relieving some potential pressure at Dawson's Beach Road and Route 1 for northbound traffic onto Route 1, and providing additional access point into the station for the new ramp to 123 and Belmont Bay Drive. One thing I'm sorry, I overlooked, going back, one other thing that I did want to just note, and this is more of an anecdotal or a separate issue, is shown on this map north of the station platform, and you can see it's a little bit difficult to see in red on this map, is an area that's a high trespasser encounter areas, as we've termed it. And I just wanted to note this. It's something that's more anecdotal in nature, based on dispatcher information rather than specific records or activity that's monitored by VRE others. But whenever there is a trespasser noted within the right-of-way by passing trains, dispatchers are notified. And so in VRE conversations with our operating partners, it has been noted very frequently that there are trespassers noted in this area. And it's one of the highest areas, if not the highest, on the Fredericksburg line. And it's believed that these are people that are crossing from the west side to the east side of Route 1 for various reasons. It's not believed that they're necessarily associated with Virginia VRE access, but it's just another consideration within this area, an known condition within this area regarding particularly pedestrian and bicycle activity. I think I get that right. I'll ask Rich to expand on that if there's anything else he wants to say on that topic.
Christine, Madam Chair, just want to emphasize here, it's a category, it's an encounter area. It's not, I believe, I can only recall, well, anyway, it's an encounter area. It's, we see trespassers out there, and, you know, in our business, this is a lot of times when you see that level of trespasser activity out there, it's simply because that's the shortest route to go. People are looking for a natural pathway. So not suggesting that the Route 123 overchange will take all that away, but as you'll note on the next slide, you know, with that access over the railroad and with, you know, pedestrian bike access and stuff like that, we look to, there's an opportunity to mitigate that or minimize that. So.
And just filling in particularly the pedestrian network to provide additional safe routes for people to move, and the additional grade separated crossing of the railroad is sort of a side potential opportunity that this project provides, but as Rich said, it's not something specifically taken into account, but it's just a kind of an aside that this project may have some benefits for that activity as well. This summarized the benefits. I think, you know, I've already talked about most of them, but both maintaining existing vehicular and bicycle pedestrian access as well as providing new access. And in particular, I think extending the roadway and pedestrian bicycle network provides more connections between the VRE station and Route 1, Route 123, and the planned North Woodbridge Town Center. The proposed concept also does not preclude future grade separated pedestrian bridge directly connecting to the VRE station. That's something that had been discussed for some time as a potential future enhancement within this area and as the town center matures. And then we talked about the potential additional grade crossing of the railroad in addition to the current Dawson's Beach Road crossing. VRE is asking that the Prince William County staff continue the discussions and coordination as if the project is funded and as the design proceeds for this interchange project, particularly focused on access to the VRE station and some of the recommendations that we suggest be considered, including having a sidewalk or trail on both sides of the proposed Route 123 bridge over Route 1, having sufficient paths for shared use and comfort level given it would be adjacent to the highway bridge, and signalization of the pedestrian crosswalks to provide maximum flexibility and minimize wait time.
That is our summary, Madam Chair.
Oh, there we go.
Sure, can you go back to the slide that shows the proposed? Yeah, so I just want to highlight that the proposed obviously is in the gray/black. The main pedestrian crossway is to the north of that, where you see Occoquan Road and Dawson's Beach. Going north is where your residential communities are, so that's the main way that people approach the VRE station. If you go south where the proposed is, there is an apartment complex kind of across the way. But the main access and where most of the residential on the north side is where Occoquan Road is. There is the Belmont Bay community to the south of there, and so they obviously have access through Dawson's Beach Road. And so just want to highlight that. And then for the proposed development at Station Plaza, that's going to be across the way, kind of where you see Route 123 and Route 1, where the arrow is pointing north. That's where their proposed development is supposed to be, kind of going west. So, you know, we're obviously in discussions to have additional pedestrian access there as well. And so the interchange isn't going to change the current access to the north and hopefully will help improve access going kind of to the east and to the southern portion. It is true that the interchange is supposed to make kind of the traffic patterns more efficient. So it is true that it's not necessarily promoting pedestrian walkways, but that's not the purpose of the project. But that doesn't mean that we're also not working hand in hand to protect the current pedestrian access, as well as working other angles to get additional pedestrian access. So just wanted to put a finer point on all of those.
Yeah, thank you both for the presentation. This is really helpful and confidence to support it. The only question I had to I think you both referenced that this would not preclude a future ped crossing, and I did spend some time with the North Woodbridge small area plan to kind of get a better beat on it too. And I know that also referenced the challenge of the ped crossing of Route 1 near the VRE station. So can you just orient us like the vision for a possible, it sounded like a ped bridge, like a grade separated pedestrian crossing over Route 1 near the VRE station. Is that right? What I know it sounds like this project is sort of neither here nor there, right? Like it doesn't make that harder, it doesn't make that easier. Where would that go?
you want to, oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
If you see that blue arrow that points down to the bottom of the slide across the two yellow lines that represent the platform, it would, yeah, exactly. Thank
Existing
you,
bridge.
Ms. Lawson. It would be, one
Extending that.
concept would be extending that across Route 1 to the other side, to the western side of Route 1, to have that continuous connection across the VRE station from the North Woodbridge Town Center.
Well, I, for one, look forward to voting in support of a resolution to get funding for that project. I think that'll go a long way towards really making, it sounds like quite a bit of development, residential development is coming, making that walkable to Vera. In the meantime, I really appreciate this with us and helping engineer the site.
Pedestrian bicycle access, does that mean it's gonna be blacktop or a sidewalk, or what does that look like? Especially in regards to the high trespasser area.
Megan, did you want to?
The one extension.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Megan Landis, Prince William County Department of Transportation. What is proposed there is a shared use path that's a 10-foot path, so it can kind of accommodate both bicyclists and pedestrians, and it would be asphalt.
Asphalt, okay, thank you.
Good question. I just, support of this, and I know that there's going to be discussion about this. Makes a lot of sense, ties very much into future of the corridor, which only is bus rapid transit that will extend the plan, or the development right now is bus rapid transit to Fort Belvoir. Next stage, the final stage is to Woodbridge. And this will be a nice tie-in. So forward to all those pieces.
Bailey and then Mr. Waukesha.
Just want to ditto what Dan just said. It would add to the beauty, and also would be a great enhancement for years, 30+ years to that area that's been needed. Simon, third support.
Yeah, I just agree with what's been said, and we focused correctly on the pedestrian improvements and pedestrian improvements. I do just want to put in a plug for our VRE riders who are driving to this station, because it is a challenge right now to get in and out, and this project will make it easier. Fortunately, not all of our riders live within a shed of the VRE station, especially in the outer suburbs, so it's too inconvenient for them to get to this station. They're just going to keep driving up 95, so this is a good project in that sense too.
Mr. Waukesha. We do not yet have a motion on the table.
Chair, I'd like to move this item forward.
Ms. Franklin, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Haven't had enough coffee this morning. Are there any other further questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a, just a quick update on our FY 2023, both operating and capital improvement project. Mr. Schofield's just gonna give folks an update, just kind of a highlight. We do have a finance committee meeting scheduled for at the conclusion of this meeting that'll actually get into the details, but we want to give, for those that aren't going to stick around for the finance committee, just want to give you a highlight. So with that, Mr. Schofield, good to see you again.
Thank you, Rich. Madam Chair, board members. With respect to the FY 2023 operating budget, in terms of expenses, as of the beginning of this week, our projection of expenses are at $96.8 million, which is essentially unchanged from where we were when we were here in September. We did a lot of work with our department heads in October, looking to reduce departmental budgets, reduce third-party consulting, other discretionary kind of initiatives. We were able to make some good reductions there. Unfortunately, those have generally been offset by an increase in our core operations and maintenance contracts with Keolis. Those contracts are linked to inflation. You may have heard that inflation is running a little higher these days. So the CPI index that we use to set those contract rates for the next year is higher, and that has essentially offset the reductions that we were able to departmental expenses. We have two major changes that are still outstanding prior to us coming to you in December. One of those is getting our final projection on liability insurance costs, and the other is waiting until essentially the last possible minute to get a projection for diesel costs. Whatever the market is telling us that diesel is looking like for fiscal 23. As far as revenues, we have not really seen any change in our ridership trends that would induce us to make a change in our admittedly rough projection for fiscal 23. We continue to see, as Rich has said, slow growth each week. We are hoping again that when the calendar turns that we will begin to see more of a pop in the ridership, but of course that's really going to depend on the work policies of the agencies and the other employers. So with that in place, we still have a projected operating deficit for 23 of approximately $23 million that will be balanced by an equal amount of our pandemic relief money. We are on track to expend essentially all of our CARES Act money by the end of this fiscal year 22. So at that point, we will be into the PRISA money, which was the second relief package. I do just want to make quick reminders on some of the key assumptions that are going into this budget. No changes to passenger fares, neither raising nor reducing them. Raising them obviously seems not tenable in the current environment, but we don't believe that if we were to lower the fares, that would essentially leave money on the table without really driving a significant increase. Second, we are not at the moment budgeting in this budget for the planned additional service that is a part of the initial phase of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. However, we are ready to go. We stand ready to add it in if the passenger demand and the general financial circumstances warrant it. And then third, given the challenges that we have with ridership and the likely need to continue to draw on those pandemic relief funds, staff's recommendation continues to be that we budget for the full jurisdictional contribution of $18.3 million. Again, that's the same as the contribution in FY21 and using the same allocation percentages, given that we have not had the chance to do the master agreements survey. I do believe there had been some questions raised about this. I believe it was placed Mr. Alcorn previously, and certainly we could have a discussion about that here, or we can talk about it. To be the recommendation that we have at this time. So finally, talk a little bit about the capital program, the 6-year CIP, and we will definitely go into more detail on this at the committee. So last year, our adopted capital program, the 6-year program, was a little over $800 million, $818 million. And that represents the projected cost of all the projects either currently underway or to be started within the 6-year period. You see here on this chart, our current CIP for the 23 to 28 period is now at $1.1 billion. You say, wow, that is a substantial increase. What's happening there? One thing in particular is really driving that. By FY 2028, assuming that TRB continues to progress as planned and all of these major capital improvements happen, we will be looking at a need for some major expenditures on expanded rolling stock, cars and locomotives. So most of those expenditures will likely be happening beyond 28, 29, 30, 31. But the first chunk of that is expected to get its hooks into the 6-year period in fiscal 28. And so we are showing that now as a part of our 6-year program. As Rich mentioned, this is something that we are going to be looking at the new IIJA, I think, as a potential funding source for this investment in rolling stock. So as we learn more about that, as we learn more about exactly when we might be bringing this rolling stock on board, we'll know more. But again, prudent to program this now to put this into the budget now. So if you look at the table real quick, that $280 million of rolling stock is really at the moment driving that unfunded number. in the right-hand column. Absent that, we really only have about $100 million of the remaining $800 million that isn't funded, and we will talk in some more detail about our plans, how to get those projects paid for in the committee. That I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
There are questions? Of course, there is a finance committee meeting after this. I'm very cognizant that sometimes our main meetings run so long that we have to postpone our subcommittee meetings. But obviously, want to respect the ability of individual members to ask questions or make comments at this time. And we will leave that to the committee and move on to our next information item.
Our last information item is just the standard spending authority report. We had 2 items up there, task order, pressure, duct cleaning, which is actually our custodial and seasonal services contractor. So they do more than duct cleaning. And then a task order to STV Incorporated under our MAC contract to prepare maintenance or locomotive truck overhaul specifications to assist us in the procurement process. So that's it. Pass through. We don't have a closed session.
We don't have a closed session, so now it is time for any board member comment. Hearing none, I want to thank you all for meeting. As a reminder, the finance committee is open to everyone, so if you would like to stay, you're welcome to do so. Moving along though, I will have a motion in a second to adjourn so we can get to that meeting. Second. Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Bailey, seconded by Ms. Franklin. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Happy Thanksgiving. Oh, yes. Don't know what day it is. But
Gonna stay here for a few minutes. We're live again.
Right. Everyone that's staying for the Finance Committee meeting. Had a meeting in a while, so this is an important meeting. So I am going to turn it over to Mark, who is
Great, thank you, Ms. Bonke. I have two handouts here, and I tried to distribute them around in case anybody. One of them is just a copy of the slides that we'll have up here on the screen. And the other is a one-page handout of something that just was a little too detailed to screen. Okay, so we will talk about, three things here today, two primary ones. First, dive into the capital improvement program in a little more detail. And then Ms. Bonke had asked for us to dive a little bit more into looking at projections of passenger revenue and what does that mean for the use of pandemic money. So we'll talk about that. I did also mention that we could talk about the jurisdictional contribution. I didn't get any bite on that in the main meeting, so if we want to, we can, but don't have to. And then I'd be happy to answer any other questions about the budget. So, and these are, thought it would be useful to do sort of a little side-by-side comparison of the 6-year program. I mentioned in the meeting that last year's EIP was a little over 800. And the one that we're on track to propose this year is significantly larger. Billion. As I mentioned, and you can see there in the second line of that table, the vast bulk of that increase is due to rolling stock. So we're about a $280 million purchase of both locomotives and rail cars, sort of at the end of this decade. It's not, we don't have the funding lined up yet. Potential state money, we'll be looking at potential money. But I just didn't, I didn't want anyone to look at that number and be like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Other than that, actually, the capital program hasn't changed a tremendous amount from last year to this year. Look at the first line, the asset management line, that's changed only about 1%. That's just some sort of minor takes. The passenger station line, that has changed, increased by about $8 million because of a change to our planned expansion at the Springfield station. In association with TRV, we are now looking at potentially constructing a tunnel, a passenger tunnel, under the new right-of-way, rather than a pedestrian bridge. Maintaining that access over to the west side of the track is very important, not just for access to VRE, but also for access to the metro station there. That is a project that is currently funded by the MBTA. Likely to use some of our existing federal money to cover the rest of the cost. And then the one other change is the reduction, actually small reduction in train maintenance and storage. Project for storage at LaFont South, where we have store trains both north and south of LaFont. We originally had been planning to install wayside power at south location, given TRV and Longbridge and the fourth track there, and also some challenges with accessing that site. We've ultimately decided that we are not going to put the wayside power there. We can still store trains there, and we just won't be able to plug them in. So we've taken the rest of that project. But by and large, say this a number of times, previously, we're in a period of doing a lot of planning, doing a lot of grant applications, things like that. We are now in a period of construction and implementation and delivery. And so our sort of core CIP at the moment, really not changing a whole lot. These things happen in cycles. So we can already see that we're going to need to be moving into another period of maybe sort of planning and things like that as we head towards the end of the decade and into the. So I'll just pause here for a second.
Any
You guys have any sort of-
Mark? Yes, Mr. Short.
Yes, sir. The detail that you were referencing changes, is there something that, is there some background information that I could look at? I mean, I know you referenced it
Yeah,
partially, but is it?
Can I get that to you next week? Is that okay?
Other questions?
So this is really the expense side of the equation. I just wanted to talk a little bit. Well, maybe I should have printed this. Talk about the funding side of the equation. So if you call back to the slide that I had in the main meeting, we have $735 million of that 1 point already programmed. It's already in place. And what's interesting is actually that a lot of it is already in place, already kind of in the bank. If you look at $518 million, VRE already has access to those funds. It's just a question of actually getting completing the projects. I think the best example, if you look about 1/3 of the I-66 session payment, we successfully got $128 million out of that program. This line capacity expansion, we have those funds in grants, they're ready to go. It's just a question of done. So I think you can see it also in that formula grant line there, sort of light gray line. Our formula monies for sort of 22, 23, 24 are pretty well programmed already. As you get out towards the later years of the CIP, we haven't yet determined exactly what money's on. So it's sort of a continuing process of identifying these projects, programming. So as we go on, we'll begin to realize, determine what we need to program for 26. And the good news is that based on the legislation that just passed, it's likely that those numbers will increase. It's not all roses. There are challenges with getting the local match, challenges with, a lot of the money is earmarked only for state of good repair. We can't use it on expansion projects. So we have to determine how to do that. But overall, I think the funding situation is looking good. So then to go on to the next one, and this is where I would ask you to look at that individual handout. Yeah, sure.
Any questions for Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry, of course.
Okay, I just have one. Under fiscal year 22, does it still look like those CIP expenses, those that haven't already been expended, will still remain?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm not following you, Ms. Bobby.
On fiscal year 22,
Yep.
which we're in right now.
Yep.
Are there any of those expenses in there that might not occur? Maybe I'll
Oh, I see.
word it that way.
Yeah, I think, as often happens, I think they can sometimes move into later years, things, permitting and planning and engineering
Right.
take longer than you think. But no,
Right.
right now, all the projects that we have planned will be moving ahead.
Okay.
We did have changes to a number of projects as a result of TRV. So some of the station expansions that we had down Fredericksburg line, we didn't need to expand them as much as we had originally. So we did go through a process with the DRPT staff, and we actually ended up giving back a couple of grants that we had originally been programmed, and then DRPT was able to use those monies for different parts of TRD.
Great.
So on this one pager, what I'd like to highlight is that last column, unfunded column, because, you know, most of the projects in here are fully funded. Talk about sort of what are our plans for these ones that are not. So the first one is the Backlit Road station improvements. We do still have some EMAC money, Lorton expansion, and that's another one of those projects that changed because of TRB, and we determined that we didn't second platform. So our intent is to work with the county, work with Fairfax County, to hopefully to reprogram those monies from Lorton over. Yeah, we haven't done that yet, which is why it's still in the unfunded column, but we hope that that's the way that the second one is the L'Enfant Station, approximately $22 million. This project is still relatively early in sort of the design stages. I'm sure that as we go along, we'll get an updated cost estimate. But we also, you know, as part of TRV, VPRA has committed some funds specifically to the fourth track part of that project. Because having the fourth track there at L'Enfant is absolutely critical to having the four track Long Bridge. If we did all the work on Long Bridge and then narrowed back down at L'Enfant, we would sort of defeat the purpose. We don't have a grant in place or an agreement in place. VRA, we need to get into the details with them. So that's why that's still in the right-hand column. But again, that is our intent for how we're going to move on that project. The next two, of course, as we talked about, are the locomotives and the coaches. Manassas Park parking improvements. We have been, as you may know, we've been working very closely with the city and their developer on this project. We moved the location of the garage a little bit, and we also added, I believe, a half a level of additional parking. And so we are hopeful that we can do the rest of the garage within sort of the original envelope that we have for the funding. If we're not able to, agreement with the city for them to cover the rest of the costs, because those costs came about because of those changes. So again, we don't know exactly what that number is going to be. We show it on here is about $3 million, but ultimately that if that does come to pass, that will come from the city.
Question about that. This is, I think it seems so bizarre that I think it might have been an error, but one of the stakeholders that I work with who's been really interested in the Long Bridge project sent me a state procurement from earlier this week that actually listed the Manassas Park mixed-use development and the garage as part of the like physical Long Bridge $2 billion procurement. Are we working? I know, I was gonna say. I have to imagine that was like some sentences from the Manassas procurement were like transposed into that. There's no reason to think those two procurements are in any way linked. Okay, I'll send it to you. It was one of the stranger things.
I mean, you know, if you were talking about the sort of the big picture improvements of rail in Northern Virginia, sure,
Maybe.
you could put those things together, but no.
But nobody's putting a bid out calling for it. I mean, that project looked for a hot second like it was a $2 billion project. So, big deal. So Manassas.
And then the last one is the broad run expansion. And this one, we are moving to the final design for this project. Rich, I don't know if you want to jump in and sort of talk about where things stand, but we are, I think we have made some very conservative assumptions with respect to this project, what's going to happen in order to, while the project is happening. My understanding is that some of those constraints are going to be sort of loosened. There's some things that are going to happen to reduce this cost number. Rich, I don't know if you want to.
I'll just say for a project like this, it has multiple components and stuff, and I've said this to the operations board before. I tasked the project team with when we came up to 30% design prior to entering in final design, I wanted it on the table. I don't want any surprises, you know, even if that number looked really big at that point. That's what I wanted. I wanted it on the table because there's a lot of risk to that, right? So we have entered into final design. That final design team has been tasked with, they're looking at it and I've told them this current estimate, we can't afford it. So you guys are gonna have to value engineer this thing and still get us what, you know, what we desire here. So that team's working on it right now. That's why we don't, trying to hold off on any kind of a, you know, searching for funds and all that kind of stuff because got such a gap there. We should be in a better position this time next year to really tighten that up and shore that up and really have a good funding plan for that entire project. So.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to highlight by looking at the specific projects was really what is our plan. But I would be happy to answer any other questions about any sort of project.
Questions from all?
So now let's talk about passenger. Item number 2. So there's so much uncertainty about how things are going to go from here on. Pretend like I have. But I want to sort of put things in some context. So prior to the pandemic, we're looking at passenger revenue of about $44 million. So just very real simple. What I have there in the first line is if we have about 18,500 riders on average fare that they're paying is about $9.50. And how many days service days do we have in a year? About 252. That's how you end up with $44 million passenger revenue. We were prior to the pandemic, I would say we were in a very sort of sustainable position with respect to passenger revenue. You know, sort of regular but not huge fare increases, things like that. And I wouldn't say comfortably above, but reasonably above that sort of 50% requirement that we had. It's coming in 2, 3 in terms of coverage. Things have obviously been much lower during the pandemic. We've also seen big changes in the average fare. You're seeing people who are maybe still purchasing like a monthly ticket, but only riding half as much or even less. So what we have right now, I would say for the month of October, our average fare is about $14. What we're projecting for FY23, as you can see up there, is about 8,000 riders on an average fare of about $12.50. And again, we expect that average fare to continue to come back down slowly over time and sort of get back more towards normal, but not all the way back to the sort of $9.50, $10 level necessarily. And so that's how that, again, roughly, that's how we ended up with the projection that we have in the 23 budget of $25 million. Ms. Baumke had asked me, well, you know, what happens if we have some recovery and we get to 10,000 riders a day, but then we sort of don't go any further? Say I endorse that, certainly, but I think that's a very appropriate question to ask. So if we're talking about, say, 10,000 riders a day, and I'm making a, you know, professional judgment guess there at an average fare of, say, $11.50, because again, we think that we're going to have people who are, you know, buying multi-ride passes, but not necessarily riding them quite as much as they used to. So that's going to keep that average fare a little bit higher than it was historically. We would end up at about 29, close to $30 million passenger revenue, which is certainly, you know, much better than where we are at the moment. But that is going to leave us, say, $15 million off of where we sort of were prior to the pandemic. So, and again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm projecting that we're going to end up at 10,000 riders a day. But again, that's if riders were to return and then we were to sort of level out at that number, that's without making any sort of major changes to our policies in terms of fares, things like that. That's where we would sort of roughly expect to be. And so here, I hope you've seen this in some previous items. I've changed it up a little bit. This is the pandemic money that we have gotten over those three, the CARES, the CRISA, and the ARP. And again, VRE did very well in those relief fund, or with those. Through the last quarter of 2020, when the pandemic began, and all of last year, about $32 million off of the CARES Act. We have budgeted for about $54 million this year, because we have significantly reduced the jurisdictional contribution for 22. We are also not getting reimbursed by the state for track access fees. So all of that reimbursement is coming out of the CARES Act as well. So a significantly higher number for the year that we're in too. And then right now, as I mentioned, looking at about $23 million for free. Again, that assumes we go back to the full amount of the subsidy. And that assumes that we go back to VRA. That let's ignore the ARP for a second. That would leave us with about $46 million remaining out of CRISA. So if you thought that we were going to be at that 10,000 number, let's say in 2025, I think that would probably, given probably some potential increases in operating costs, things like that, I think you would probably use up, most of the rest of that CRISA money by, say, the end of fiscal 20. Hard to say, very hard to say, but that, and I'm leaving the ARP stuff totally off to the side. We have had discussions about making some sort of strategic capital investments with the ARP. If it looked like we needed to, just like the debt discussion, if it looks like things are changing and we need to politically revisit things, we certainly can do that. And that would, $118 million worth of ARP money, you could spread that out over a very Bonky, I hope that gets at your sort of 10,000 rider question.
Nobody knows where we're gonna be, but I just think I thought it was important for us to just pick a number, kind of look at, I'm not even gonna say worst case, because we don't know what worst case or best case is, but at least you have an idea now of what we look like for the next 3 years without using the ARP money. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Mr. Alphonse.
Yeah, thank you. Let me be part of it. So I was just doing some of the numbers, and this is extremely helpful. Thank you very much for pulling this together. So looks like if we do get to, and I know this is hypothetical, but the 10K a day, we're needing about 15 million a year with extra costs, probably 16, 17, something like that. We're still going to run out of money. 3.5 years. So unless
23, 24,
and I guess so the 15 million a year I think is helpful if we do find ourselves in a structural operating deficit. At some point we're going to have to address that. So I guess one thing that I would, a couple thoughts. One is, at a jurisdictional level, we're also still dealing with pandemic fallout. The other thing that I worry about a little bit is, frankly, for maybe some of the more uninformed, this number looks really big. Carrying a pretty darn large fund balance forward. Don't want it to look like we are, banking this money, and frankly, we're a sitting duck. For somebody who might come along and say, oh, you're rich, we'll go ahead and take something away, or cut off this other revenue source or something, because you guys are fine. So I would encourage us to think about doing, at least in the coming year, FY '23, to do something relating to the subsidy and provide some subsidy relief to the jurisdictions. I was looking at the numbers. If we did the same amount that we did in FY '22, that would bring down what would be left starting in FY '24 would be down to about 33 million from the 46 million. It'd be a pretty significant reduction. I guess what I would suggest is, maybe we just look to scale down subsidy and go, like if we took, I guess you haven't got to this.
Well, yeah, I mean, they
all
flow right
ties
into each
together.
other. Let's do it.
So jumping to the next slide, maybe what might make sense is to flip this. So instead of 74% operational subsidy relief, we would have something around 74% of operational subsidy paid. So we would go from say, using $13.5 million of federal relief to cover the subsidy to something around $4.5 million of the federal money. So we flip that chart some way. I guess.
Am I following? So that essentially though means the federal relief runs out sooner. So like our cliff gets moved up a fiscal year.
Yeah, about 3 or 4 months. I mean, honestly, if we're gonna have that problem, 3 or 4 months, 3.5 years. Significant. It's a time period. And I do worry about sitting on this amount of money. So anyway, that would be my suggestion is let's see if we could scale down still have some subsidy relief and start phasing it down.
From speaking just for myself, on the one hand, I think those kinds of decisions informed what we did for FY '22. Wanted to show that we were giving to fictions, to show that we were state that they would be able to those rail monies in some other places. So I do think on the one hand, absolutely that kind of thinking was what we were doing. I will admit that what you're proposing makes me a little nervous just because your ridership return is so cloudy.
I understand, but we're going to be having to make it up anyway, in 3.5 years. It's going to come back to us one way.
I guess I was just thinking of comments that Mr. Walken had made previously when we had this sort of discussion, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Mark. I'm comfortable, I think, with it as it's presented, but I guess if we're looking to spend additional money, I guess I'm thinking about his comments about needing to attract the ridership, and do we actually put that towards the passenger fare side of things? I'm not sure that's the right answer, because things are so uncertain, but I guess, jurisdictions also just got a lot of relief money as well, I guess is what I'm thinking.
I could add to that. I mean, I think I also would prefer to see if we could spend it in some way to attract new ridership. I think our riders are not particularly price sensitive given how many benefits. So I don't know that a reduced fare product is necessarily the way to attract them. But I mean, we've talked before about could this be an opportunity to experiment with new service. I actually saw FAMPO wrote a letter. It was surprising, their legislative package calling on the state to help us identify new slots for services, which it looks like they're running with it. But if there are any opportunities for us to, I know we talked about that and it may be totally infeasible with the host railroads, but there are opportunities for us to pilot anything new in terms of off-peak, bi-directional weekend, anything else, that will come at some cost. And I think I'd rather see early spend down of funds towards something that's going to help us recover that passenger fare revenue, offset sectional subsidies. I mean, I think for my part, it just sort of feels like, why would we not buy ourselves as much runway as possible? I appreciate your point, and that's certainly been true. Like we've seen other transit stakeholders in the system who VRE had received less of this share. But I think to give ourselves a shorter runway I would want to believe that that's doing something for us, like investing in something that's gonna track right.
Yeah, I think if you look at how much my jurisdiction, Mr. Stark's jurisdiction is paying, we have a little different perspective.
Sure.
You know, this is a significant burden for Fairfax County to pay this jurisdiction subsidy. And I guess what I would ask would be for staff to put together a table that actually spells out, that shows a timeline with some of these hypotheticals. So when the money might run out. I mean, right now, this is very helpful to show what the amount in FY '24, how much would be remaining. But if we did phase down, we did one more year of subsidy reduction, what would it mean in terms of hypothetically when the, and then we could make a more informed decision.
So just one more year of it, not a deeper subsidy reduction.
And actually, what I was suggesting is not even continuing the support that we got in FY '22 in terms of a 74% reduction.
Yeah.
But flip this and basically, instead of getting $13 million off the subsidy, just look to get that small
For more years.
for the coming year, for
Yeah.
FY '23.
Yeah.
But I would want to see the sort of the timeline and how that does, you know, affect.
Right. 2 months of less runway is a big difference than 8 months of less runway.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I do agree that, you know, there may be some things we can do to shift. Fare reduction may not be. But, you know, some marketing things, some promotional things, which does cost money.
So I think we need to see. I think, you know, that I'll be supporting something. Because I think it's obviously the balance is risk, challenges to be on, well as the degree of difficulty of if in essence provide this money back to jurisdictions if we need future years. And to be honest, if our ridership doesn't come back, conversation or how do we reduce our operating costs? So I don't see that this being having an early discussion about how do we address the future, assuming different scenarios, and how do we as a result of those different scenarios. So I know that I want to see that it's going to be a part of the discussion regardless. So have data and we have information that gives us a sense of what that is. I think discussions and give us a richer one to make some sort of at least near-term decision that we understand has a lot.
I think it's on us to get you something on that this week, the Thanksgiving, just so that you have time to sort of digest it. We'll say that mechanically this is relative, from a budgeting perspective, this is relatively, you're just sort of taking out the subsidy and putting in, you know, for some money. It's just they balance each other. So this isn't having like big knock-on impacts to.
If not next week, then some other week. I'm a big proponent of work-life balance, especially in these stressful times. So the more coming up, not to go right around the corner and give us something, but it's just before the next meeting.
Yeah, but I do want you all to have the chance to sort of think about this, maybe talk to each other. Just having to hash it out at the meeting. And again, if
This is really good conversation to have. They might need to see a few more other scenarios with it spelled out while you sat there and did the math. Yeah, okay. But not everybody is. So I think that we need to have some different scenarios looking at the ridership. especially in light of the fact that we're probably gonna be issuing bonds next year. Of course, that's with C-Rock, but it all works together. It's all finances. Which brings me to, is that my, you mentioned, Mark, in your comments that staff had made reductions in expenses. About how much were those? And is there a percentage by department? How did you do that?
No, we went through each individual, no, we didn't say, you have to cut everybody has to cut the department by X percent. It was one-on-one discussions with all the department heads. Particularly looking at sort of third-party consulting, looking at sort of just discretionary activities, things like that. Things that we can reduce. Please don't hold me to these numbers. I think it was on the order of about 400,000, $500,000 reductions that we were able to find. But again, those ended up unfortunately being offset by the increases to the
If the board, this is a hypothetical, if the board said, okay, Mark, that's not enough, we need more. How much more do you think you could gain this year? Some really short decisions. And I don't think we're there yet, but I just want to ask the question.
Sure. I'll say, VRE budget does not have a ton of discretionary spending in it. Given a particular level of service that we've agreed to provide between the access fees to the host railroads, the to Keolis, the operations and maintenance, diesel fuel, sort of the necessary costs of actually running the service, and then our sort of core staff, the calories and benefits of the core staff, you're already talking 80% of the budget or something, like some very high percentage of the budget. So I think we could, if the mandate came down, we absolutely could find some things, but I don't want to make it seem like it's easily go in and say, like, if you went in and said, oh, okay, the budget needs to be 10%. That would be very, very challenging without having to begin actual service.
Okay. It's very helpful. Mr. Stewart.
I was looking at the financial report and kind of dropped off. Looking at this, it says 9.4% per projected for the departmental operating expense. So I was unclear about what the that's on the page 10 of today's meeting. It's 9.4%.
Oh, I'm sorry. CEO report?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a CEO report. Okay, great.
It was a surprise that it went up, given revenues are down, et cetera, and I didn't specific, what, I assume it's something big, because that's 10% basically.
Diesel fuel. It's the absolute.
Diesel fuel, is that the projection, the results are much higher than the projection?
Much higher than last year and much higher than the projection, yes. So when we developed, let's keep talking. Yeah, when we developed the 22 budget, right, sort of earlier on in the pandemic, and we consultant said, hey, what's the market telling you diesel fuel out in FY22? Gave us that number, and I think gasoline prices or petroleum prices rather have really jumped a lot more than the market expected, and so that's back in the bottom.
Let me just add, and let's go back and look at it, because it looks like also, that's September. It looks like it could be one of those, where we make insurance payments and that type of stuff, sort of that once, that annual piece, and that's usually around the August, September timeframe. So I just
It may not be systematic, it may not be appropriate for the year, maybe just.
Yeah, it was in that same timeframe. We were still processing some, in our insurance payments and stuff, which were multi-million-dollar invoices that we were paying. So it could have hit the books.
That, it's finished down your pension. 8.4%.
So why don't we already are looking to give you an answer next week on first question. Why don't we dig into that for you?
I don't know what historically the finance committee has gotten, but get a little bit more information than part of the committee. That gave me an overall, operating expenses, but it doesn't, there's no broad breakdown. I'm not this category, which give me a sense of expenses.
So I would say at the moment, we do not have a, sort of an additional more detailed report that we give to the committee, but I chair, if we wanted to.
Chair is fine.
Develop something like that.
Just make a plug for this, our enterprise resource system that we've just gone live in September. That in itself gives us the capability to run some more of these, more detailed reports. They're not, a lot of what we do now is somewhat manual. So this has been discussed before. Going forward, we can customize to some degree what exactly at different levels within the operations board needs that information. So we do definitely have an opportunity moving forward to enhance our communication.
I think that would be helpful. Kind of tagging on the diesel cost, knowing now what we know about inflation. I would think that you're having conversations with our diesel projector. You'll be bringing that information. Budget.
Yep. So I am looking to talk to him sort of right after Thanksgiving to get that, like I said, so, want to wait as late as we can to get the projection for 23, just to have the latest information.
He's probably going to have a different projection than he did last year.
Very different, very different.
Okay, other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just very quickly, so when staff comes back, and it doesn't need to be next week, a couple weeks or whenever, on that sort of projections and hypotheticals, I think it would also be helpful there with some of the potential driving variables might be in terms of whether ridership actually does, get to 10,000 or it doesn't, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Would be really helpful, because we need to balance all that. Frankly, at MBTA last night, we saw a chart that showed a number of the different regional transit systems, and VRE was the lowest in terms of coming back from pre-pandemic levels in terms of ridership. So, let's make sure we understand what we're looking at and be able to make that judgment call in terms of likelihood that we.
The simple math that I was doing here. Not only is the number of daily riders hard to predict, the average fare is hard to predict because you don't know exactly how people. Just the only one that we really know is the number of days in the year. So, but yeah, I don't want to explode it and give you guys like a dozen different kind of scenarios, but we'll try to hit a couple.
Yes.
What do we think, going back to the slide about
Sorry.
Is there, going back to the slide about the passenger fare revenue and funds, the totals that you have there, build back better, see that there's any money in there. The other sources, but is there anything?
Joe maybe can jump in, but I think the challenge with some of the more recent bills is that these are really for capital projects. What the beauty of these is they're 100% money. They don't require a match, and we can use them for operations. And that's not going to be true, I think. Joe, I don't know if you
have anything.
Yeah, like Mark said, the recently passed IIJA, I hope they come up with, is all about capital. So we have very little opportunity to talk about operating funds out of that. Build Back Better, first of all, it's one of those things where not everybody is sure exactly what's in it, but there's almost very little transit urban space programs in that. There are some more rural type programs
just one
Sure.
overall question when we get. You mentioned when we started the changes to, this is the fiscal year 2023, 2028 CIP, mentioned the changes from 20. Station facilities, I know you're gonna give us a little bit more information on that. $8.4 million that's there. I was wondering, didn't see that in existing, see that in this table. I don't think I saw this table, so I was just trying to get clarity about whether or not, I'm sorry, in the, excuse me, from detail listing, under these Springfield, Fairfield, Franklin station improvements, is that 18,901,150? It's in there right now for the station improvements. Does it include reference that you were making about the, I don't know how much of that 8 million that's going to be CIP is related to the station. But is it in there now, or is it to be added?
It's in there now. The $18 million expected cost of the project reflects the cost of the pedestrian tunnel. Reflects the change from the previous lower.
So all of these numbers and changes are already included.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That was this table here was really just intended to say, you know, hey, there's a really big increase going from last year to this year. Why is that? And really, it's about the rolling stock. The other changes have been relatively marginal.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Mark, we know where we're going for our next. So do we want to have another meeting, or do we want to talk individually?
I would say we're going to have the audit committee before next month's meeting, prior to next month's meeting. It's important, of course. So I don't know that we'll have a chance to have a finance committee meeting next week, unless we were to have one completely apart from our schedule. So I would say maybe some individual conversations. Maybe I will draft some of these things, maybe share them with you. Once you and I are sort of on the same page, then we can distribute them.
Right, and then we can talk individually, is that all right? Okay, and then we'll prepare to come back and make a recommendation to the full board. 17. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.